The Grand Chamber of Concordia Prime stretched 300 meters in every direction. Its walls made of crystalline materials that shifted colors with each spoken word. And at the center stood Ambassador Elena Vasquez of Earth, her dark suit a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and biological displays of the alien delegates. Surrounding her, the Council of 12 occupied their elevated platforms, each representing a species that had dominated galactic politics for thousands of years, and their attention focused on the human woman with mixtures of condescension and irritation that Elena had learned to recognize. Over her 15 years of service, Resolution 4477 has been approved by majority vote, announced the Zentari speaker, his crest of feathers rippling through shades of bureaucratic blue. Humanity will reduce antimatter production by 40%. Dismantle all experimental jump gate networks within 6 months. And accept permanent observers aboard all military and research vessels. Elena stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that her military training had made second nature, and she felt the weight of 300 years of human membership in this council pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. The elder species have expressed concern about humanity's rapid technological advancement, continued the speaker, his tone suggesting he was reading from a prepared statement rather than speaking his own thoughts. It is deemed necessary for galactic stability that appropriate limitations be implemented. Around the chamber, representatives from 40 lesser species watched in silence, and Elena could see the fear in their eyes, because if the Council could do this to humanity after 3 centuries of loyal service, what protection did anyone truly have? The Crix hegemony representative leaned forward on his platform, his reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile, and his translator rendered his hissing speech into flat, emotionless words. Humanity has forgotten its place in the natural order. Natural order, Elena repeated, and she allowed herself a small smile that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Ambassador Thresh, in the 300 years since humanity joined this council, we have maintained your deep space defense networks, operated mining equipment in environments that would kill your species within minutes, designed the shipping algorithms that keep your economy functioning, and created the medical advances that extended the average lifespan of council species by 30%. She turned slowly, making eye contact with each of the 12 in succession, and her voice remained calm but carried to every corner of the vast chamber. We have paid our tribute, followed your laws, and accepted our designated role as support specialists, which we all know is simply a polite way of saying we do the work you consider too dangerous or too tedious for your own people. The Ashen Collective's spokesperson, a being of crystallized silicon whose voice emanated from vibrations in the air itself, spoke with the weight of assumed authority. Humanity's continued advancement threatens the balance that has maintained peace for 10,000 years. Peace, Elena said softly, and she pulled out a small data tablet from her jacket pocket. Or control. She activated the tablet, and holographic displays erupted throughout the chamber, showing statistics and reports that made several delegates gasp. And the data detailed every instance of technological suppression, every patent that had been classified for security reasons, and every research project that humanity had been ordered to abandon for 300 years. We believe we were partners in this council, Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. We thought the limitations were temporary, that eventually we would be trusted as equals. She gestured to the displays floating around the chamber. But these records show a pattern, and that pattern exists not just for humanity, but for every species that has shown potential to rival the 12, the Cathrin Unity representative, a species that had been council members for only 800 years and still remembered what it felt like to be controlled. watched Elena with obvious interest, and his antennae were vibrating in a way that suggested deep thought. "This is outrageous," the Ashen spokesperson declared. "Its vibrations taking on a harsh frequency. You present classified materials in open session, materials that humanity obtained through our intelligence services," Elena replied. "Services that apparently function better than yours, since you didn't notice us accessing your archives for the past 5 years." The chamber erupted into chaos, with dozens of species shouting in various languages and frequencies, and the translators struggled to keep up with the cacophony of outrage and accusation. But Elena simply stood calmly at the center of it all. The Zentari speaker activated a harmonic tone that gradually silenced the room, and his crest had shifted to angry red. "Ambassador Vasquez, you are dangerously close to actions that could be considered hostile. Then it's fortunate that what I'm about to say will resolve any ambiguity," Elena said. And she straightened to her full height. "Humanity formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately." The silence that followed was absolute, and Elena could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as she continued. "We will honor all existing trade contracts until their natural expiration dates, and we will provide proper compensation for any Council facilities located in human space. But all Council representatives have 72 hours to evacuate from Earth and its colonies." Ambassador Thresh rose from his platform, his claws scraping against metal. "No species has ever withdrawn from the Council, and you cannot simply decide to abandon your obligations. We can, and we have," Elena replied. "Earth's government voted unanimously 3 days ago, and our colony systems have all ratified the decision. So as of this moment, humanity is no longer bound by Council law or Council authority." She pulled out another data chip and held it up for everyone to see. "This contains every patent, every research paper, every technological innovation that humanity has developed during our 3 centuries of membership." The chamber went deathly quiet as Elena continued. "We are releasing all of this information, completely free of charge, to every independent species and minor civilization that is not currently a Council member." The implications hit the Council members like a physical blow, and Elena could see the calculations running behind their eyes, because the galactic black market was about to be flooded with human technology. Everything from medical manets to weapons systems to FTL communication protocols. "You would destabilize the entire galactic economy," the Ashen spokesperson accused, its vibrations now tinged with something that might have been fear. "We would level the playing field," Elena corrected. "Every species that the Council has kept suppressed through information control and technological gatekeeping will now have access to innovations you've been hoarding." She touched her earpiece and spoke a single word: "Execute," throughout the galaxy. Human ships began departing from Council space in a coordinated evacuation that had been planned down to the minute. And maintenance contracts were formally terminated, research partnerships dissolved, and defense agreements voided. "The human quarter of Concordia Prime is being evacuated as we speak," Elena informed the Council. "Our people will leave the station clean and undamaged, but we will not be coming back." She turned to leave, her footsteps echoing in the stunned silence, but paused at the entrance and looked back one final time. "You wanted us to know our place in your natural order, so we found a new place outside of it entirely." As Elena walked through the corridors toward the docking bay where her ship waited, she passed humans in maintenance uniforms, research coats, and diplomatic attire, all moving with purpose toward the evacuation points. And she knew that across hundreds of worlds and thousands of stations, the same scene was playing out. The Council had wanted humanity to be small, controllable, and useful. But they had made a fundamental error in their calculations, because humans had never been good at accepting limits imposed by others. Behind her, in the Council chamber, the 12 were beginning to understand what they had lost. But Elena didn't look back because humanity's future lay ahead. And it would be built on their own terms. The first human transport jumped to FTL. And across the galaxy, the old order began to crack. 6 months had passed since humanity severed all bonds with the Galactic Council. And Commander Thresh of the Krix hegemony stared at the tactical display aboard his flagship with growing horror as another weapons malfunction cascaded through the fleet's targeting systems. Engineering. Report. Thresh hissed into his communicator, his claws drumming an anxious pattern on his command chair. The response came filtered through static and frustration. Sir, the adaptive targeting algorithms are rejecting our manual overrides, and the defensive subroutines keep defaulting to outdated parameters that leave us vulnerable to even basic attack patterns. Thresh felt his scales ripple with barely contained rage because he knew exactly what was happening. And every officer on his bridge knew it too, though none dared speak it aloud. The systems were failing because humans had built them. Krix had never bothered to truly understand the technology they purchased from human contractors because that was beneath warriors. And they had assumed the systems would simply continue functioning forever with minimal maintenance. But the reality was far more complex. Human programmers had designed adaptive AI that learned and evolved based on new threats. And those programmers had also provided regular updates and patches that kept the systems ahead of potential enemies. But now there were no more updates coming. And worse, the technology humanity had released to independent species meant the pirates and raiders were using human innovations that the Krix defensive systems had never been programmed to counter. How many ships in the fleet are combat ready? Thresh demanded. His tactical officer checked his console and delivered the devastating news. 43%. Sir. And that number drops to 12% if we exclude vessels still running on pre-human legacy systems on the other side of the galaxy. In the crystalline towers of the Ashen Collective's administrative center, Coordinator Vex studied production reports with mounting desperation. And the numbers painted a picture of economic collapse that no amount of political maneuvering could disguise. Mineral extraction across 12 worlds had decreased by 78% in 6 months. And the deep core mining operations that supplied the rare elements essential for FTL drives had stopped completely, because humans had been the only species willing to work in conditions where temperatures exceeded 3,000 degrees and radiation would sterilize any organic being within hours. The Ashen had considered such work beneath them, suitable only for hardy species like humans with their ridiculous tolerance for extreme conditions and their bizarre cultural obsession with challenging the impossible. But now those same humans were operating independent mining facilities in unclaimed territories and selling to the highest bidder at prices the collective couldn't match. We could hire mercenaries to operate the equipment, suggested Sub-Coordinator Trell, his silicon structure flickering with hopeful frequencies. Vex's response vibrated with bitter harmonics. We tried that. And the 3 non-human species capable of surviving the conditions are demanding 5 times what we paid humans. And even then, their efficiency is 40% lower. He pulled up another display showing market analysis. Meanwhile, human competitors are undercutting our prices while maintaining higher purity standards. And 17 of our traditional buyers have switched to human suppliers. The meeting dissolved into arguments about tariffs and sanctions and market manipulation. But Vex knew the truth they were all avoiding. The Ashen Collective had built an empire on the assumption that they could always find someone to do the dangerous work cheaply. And humans had called that bluff by simply walking away far from the Council's core worlds. Station Meridian 7 drifted in neutral space, a massive construct of human engineering that had technically never belonged to the Council despite its location. And its multi-species population was experiencing something unprecedented. Prosperity without permission. Station Master Chun walked through the bustling commercial districts where species that had never qualified for council membership were setting up embassies and trade offices. And the energy in the air felt like hope mixed with revolution. A Talkari merchant, whose species had been classified as insufficient development by the council for 300 years, grabbed Chun's arm with surprising strength. Master Chun, I must thank you again for the medical fabricator license. Chun smiled warmly. You don't need to thank me. And you don't need a license anymore because humanity released all those patents for free. Remember, the Tokari's eye stalks waved with emotion. My homeworld has been trying to manufacture basic medical supplies for decades. But the council said we needed to develop the technology ourselves. But they also made it illegal for anyone to teach us. And now with your fabricators, we can produce everything we need. Similar conversations were happening throughout the station as species discovered that human technology came without the strings and restrictions the council had always attached. And Meridian 7 had become the premier hub for what people were calling the Independent. Coalition Chun received a communication from his security chief. Boss, we've got 3 more species asking about joining the Coalition's charter. And they're offering exclusive trade agreements if we can guarantee protection from council interference. Tell them we'll review their applications, Chun responded. And remind them that the Coalition isn't about humanity leading anyone because we're all equal partners here. Back in council space, emergency sessions were being held with increasing frequency and decreasing effectiveness. And the Zentari Communion had convened its industrial council to address a crisis that threatened their entire shipbuilding economy. The primary shipyard at Zentha 4 had suffered a catastrophic failure in its gravitational stabilization system, and the facility that produced 60% of civilian transports for the council was now floating dead in space with 40 ships in various stages of construction and 3,000 workers trapped inside. The humans who designed this facility included fail-safes that we don't understand, admitted Chief Engineer Karav, his crest flat with shame. We have the technical manuals, but the systems are integrated in ways that require expertise we simply don't possess. The council chair's feathers rippled through frustrated colors. Can we not simply hire human engineers to repair it? We've tried, Karav replied. Every human contractor we've contacted has refused. And it's not because of government prohibition, but rather because there's a grassroots movement among human workers who are collectively declining any council work. He displayed social media posts from human networks showing the phrase that had become a rallying cry. They wanted us gone. And we're gone. The Zenthari Council sat in uncomfortable silence as they contemplated the implications, because this wasn't political maneuvering or economic warfare, but rather something more personal. Humans were simply done with the council on every level. Meanwhile, the council's central administration had decided to implement economic sanctions against humanity in the hope of forcing negotiations. But the policy backfired within weeks when human colonies strengthened their ties with non-council species and created an alternative economic sphere that was actually growing faster than the council's. Traditional markets ambassador Korvax of the Catherine Unity watched these developments with great interest from his private chambers, and he had been secretly meeting with human representatives for months because his species remembered what it felt like to be controlled and limited by the council's developmental protocols. The Gainthern had been members for 800 years, but had never been truly accepted as equals. And they had watched humanity's withdrawal with envy and hope, because if humans could walk away successfully, perhaps others could follow. The final blow to the council's economic strategy came when independent trade routes, established by humans and their new partners, began offering better prices and faster shipping than council-regulated lanes. and species that had been captive markets for millennia suddenly had choices in the Crix hegemony's military academy. Instructors struggled to explain to students why their supposedly superior fleet was being outmaneuvered by pirates using human-designed weapons, and the cognitive dissonance was creating a crisis of confidence in the warrior culture on ashen mining worlds. Automated facilities sat silent because no one knew how to restart the complex systems that humans had maintained so effortlessly. And production quotas that had been met for centuries were now impossible dreams at Meridian 7 and dozens of stations like it. The alternative economy flourished as species traded freely without council oversight. And technological innovations flowed between civilizations that were finally being treated as capable partners rather than primitive children. Council convened another emergency session, and the Zentari speaker's crest had lost all its color as he announced, "The situation at Zenta 4 has reached critical status, and we must acknowledge that we need human expertise to prevent complete facility loss." He looked around at the remaining council members. "I propose we open formal negotiations with Earth to discuss the terms under which human engineers might be contracted for emergency repairs." The response from the human government arrived within hours, and it was read aloud. 1 year after humanity's departure from the Galactic Council, the situation had evolved from economic disruption into something far more dangerous, and the carefully maintained power structure that had dominated galactic politics for millennia was beginning to fracture in ways that terrified the elder species. Catherine Unity's formal withdrawal announcement came during what was supposed to be a routine council session, and Ambassador Korvax stood before the diminished assembly with his antennae vibrating in defiant patterns that his species used to signal revolution. "The Catherine Unity hereby withdraws all membership and obligations to the Galactic Council," Korvax declared, his translated voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "We cite the same grievances that humanity presented 1 year ago, and we can no longer participate in a system that exists to suppress rather than support its members." The Zentari speaker's crest flashed through shocked colors. "Ambassador Korvax, your species has been a council member for 800 years, and this decision will have severe consequences." "Consequences," Korvax repeated, and his antennae patterns shifted to something that approximated human laughter, like the consequences humanity faced when they left. And yet, they now lead the fastest-growing economic coalition in galactic history, while our economies crumble. He gestured to the data displays. 24 minor species have applied to join what they're calling the Independent Coalition. And they're not asking humanity to lead them, but rather requesting partnership as equals. The statistics were undeniable and terrifying for the Council because the Independent Coalition had established trade agreements that bypassed Council regulations entirely. And technological exchange was happening at rates that made the old developmental protocols look like the control mechanisms they had always been. The Satian Collective spokesperson vibrated with angry frequencies. "The Catherine betray millennia of stability for short-term gains, and this chaos will destroy the order that has prevented galactic war. Or perhaps," Korvax replied calmly, "it will create a new order based on mutual respect rather than enforced hierarchy." Within weeks of the Catherine withdrawal, 3 more mid-tier Council species were quietly negotiating with the Independent Coalition, and intelligence reports suggested that minor species throughout the galaxy were openly questioning why they should accept Council authority when alternatives existed. Council's response came from the Crix hegemony's military leadership, and Commander Thresh presented a proposal that he claimed would restore order. "We declare human space a destabilized region requiring peacekeeping intervention, and we establish a blockade of major human trade routes." The Zentari speaker's crest rippled with uncertainty. "A military blockade is an act of war, Commander, and the stated purpose is to prevent weapons proliferation." "The true purpose," Thresh said bluntly, is to force humanity to negotiate a return to Council authority. Because if we allow this independent coalition to continue growing, the Council will become irrelevant. The vote was closer than it should have been, but desperation won out over wisdom, and the Council authorized a fleet to blockade human trade routes under the official justification of preventing dangerous technology from spreading to unprepared civilizations. The blockade fleet was impressive by any measure. 300 warships representing 5 Council species, led by the Krix hegemony's finest dreadnoughts, and their deployment to the borders of human space was intended as an overwhelming show of force that would bring humanity back to the negotiating table. What followed was not the quick resolution the Council had anticipated. Human ships did not engage in traditional fleet battles because humanity had spent the past year studying every military engagement in Council history, and they had learned that the Council expected warfare to follow predictable patterns of fleet positioning and broadside exchanges instead. Human ships employed guerrilla tactics that the Council military minds considered dishonorable. Hit-and-run strikes appeared from unexpected vectors. Sensor jamming made targeting nearly impossible, and worst of all, the independent coalition species were using human-designed weapons and tactics to harass Council supply lines. A Krix patrol squadron encountered what appeared to be a Catheran merchant convoy near the Serpentis Expanse, and following standard protocols, they moved to intercept and search for contraband technology. Convoy is maintaining course, reported the patrol commander's tactical officer. No sign of weapons or defensive systems. The commander felt satisfaction at what seemed like an easy capture that would demonstrate Council authority. Close to boarding distance and prepare inspection teams, the Krix ships accelerated toward the convoy, their targeting systems locked on the seemingly defenseless transports, and they were less than 10,000 kilometers away when the trap was sprung. The merchant ships were automated drones broadcasting false signatures, and when the Krix squadron entered the kill zone, human ships decloaked from positions that should have been impossible to hide in, while Catheran, Telkari, and 3 other species materialized from different vectors in a coordinated ambush. The battle lasted 17 minutes. Eshimon-designed weapons tore through Krix shields that had been configured to defend against known Council technology, and the automated drones that had played the role of helpless merchants now deployed electronic warfare systems that scrambled targeting computers and communications. The tactical innovations were brutal in their effectiveness. Human ships used the gravity well of a nearby moon to slingshot into attack positions that put them above and below the Krix formation. Smaller coalition vessels darted through the confused patrol squadron like predators hunting panicked prey, and coordinated fire focused on propulsion systems rather than trying to destroy ships outright. When the Krix commander finally ordered retreat, he had lost 6 ships completely, and 17 more were crippled, while the attacking force had suffered only minor damage to 3 vessels. Worse than the military defeat was what happened next. Humanity broadcast the entire battle across the Dosun galaxy through public networks that the Council had no authority to block. And billions of beings watched as the superior Council species were outmaneuvered and defeated by the civilizations they had kept suppressed. The political fallout was immediate and devastating. 3. Council species formally announced they were opening negotiations with the independent coalition, and even the Zentari communion faced internal protests as their population demanded explanations for why their government was participating in what looked increasingly like a war to maintain unjust dominance. The Ashen Collective demanded more aggressive military action and proposed deploying 60% of the Council's combined fleet to crush human space before the rebellion spread further. But the Zentari pushed for reconciliation and suggested offering humanity favorable terms to rejoin the Council. Arguments grew heated as the Council chamber became divided between those who wanted to escalate and those who wanted to negotiate, and the unity that had maintained galactic order for 10,000 Years was shattering under the weight of its own contradictions. But something darker was happening in the shadows. Elena Vasquez was reviewing trade agreements in her office on Luna when the first assassination attempt occurred. And only her military training and reflexes saved her life as a micro-drone fired a plasma charge that would have vaporized her head. Security forces captured the drone and traced its components to a manufacturer that supplied Council intelligence services. And within days, 2 more human officials were targeted. A colony administrator on New Venice was killed by poison that matched ashen biological weapons. And a renowned human scientist survived only because her personal shield generator activated. Milliseconds before a kinetic strike hit, human intelligence agencies worked around the clock to gather evidence. And what they discovered was both expected and infuriating. The Council had authorized a black operations campaign to eliminate key human figures in the hope of destabilizing the independent coalition's leadership. The evidence was solid and detailed, showing approval from a secret council committee that officially didn't exist. And humanity's response was calculated to maximize political damage while maintaining moral superiority at exactly 0300 Galactic Standard Time. Human security forces executed simultaneous operations across 200 locations in human space. And every Council intelligence asset they had identified was arrested or expelled in a perfectly coordinated action that lasted exactly 47 minutes. The operatives were not executed or tortured, but they were brought before cameras where their confessions and evidence of Council operations were broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. And then they were released to return home with the message that humanity knew exactly what the Council was doing. The galactic community reacted with shock and outrage because the Council had been caught ordering assassinations against a species that had simply chosen to leave their organization. And the moral authority the Council claimed as guardians of galactic peace evaporated overnight. Even species that had been loyal to the Council for 80 months after humanity severed ties with the Galactic Council, the galaxy teetered on the edge of war. And the 30-day deadline humanity had imposed hung over every species. Like a countdown to an unknown catastrophe, intelligence agencies from every Council member threw unlimited resources at discovering what the Prometheus Protocol meant. And their analysts pored over every human communication they could intercept, bribe sources in neutral space, and even attempted to infiltrate human networks with increasingly desperate measures. The assassinations escalated in frequency and brutality. A human colony administrator on Kepler 442b was killed when her shuttle exploded during atmospheric entry, and forensic analysis found traces of Crick's military-grade explosives in the wreckage. Then, a human agricultural researcher was murdered on a supposedly secure space station. His body found with the distinctive cellular damage that only ashen sonic weapons could produce. Elena Vasquez received the news of each death personally, and she felt the weight of every lost life because these were people she knew, colleagues she had worked with, and friends she had shared meals with during long diplomatic negotiations. The third assassination attempt on Elena herself came during a diplomatic reception on Mars. And this time, the assassins tried a coordinated strike using both biological agents and kinetic weapons. Elena survived because her security detail had become paranoid to the point of excellence. And they detected the biological agent before it could be deployed while simultaneously neutralizing the sniper position 3 kilometers away. The captured operatives were Xanthari, which was particularly painful because that species had been humanity's most sympathetic voice in the Council. And their confessions revealed that hardline factions within the Xanthari government had been overruled by moderates, but had acted independently. Anyway, human intelligence services had been quietly building their case throughout all of this, and they had assembled a devastating collection of evidence: communication intercepts, financial records, video footage, and testimony from defectors that conclusively proved Council involvement in every assassination and attempted assassination. Human response came at exactly 900 Galactic Standard Time across every human-controlled territory simultaneously, in a coordinated operation that demonstrated the frightening efficiency of human organizational capability. Security forces identified and moved against every Council intelligence asset in human space. Safe houses were raided, communications networks were dismantled, and agents who had operated in secret for years found themselves arrested in perfectly timed strikes. The operation lasted exactly 47 minutes from first breach to final arrest, and it swept up 237 operatives from 12 different species, including some whose governments had publicly denied any intelligence operations in human space. But humanity didn't execute these prisoners or subject them to torture instead. Each operative was brought before recording devices where human interrogators methodically documented their confessions, and the evidence of Council operations was verified and cross-referenced until it formed an irrefutable record of systematic assassination attempts authorized by the highest levels of Council government. Then, in what many Council leaders found more disturbing than any punishment would have been, humanity released every single prisoner unharmed. The confessions and evidence were broadcast simultaneously across every public network in the galaxy, and the operatives were escorted to the borders of human space with a simple message: "We know what you did, and we want the galaxy to know too. And now you can go home." The political earthquake that followed reshaped the galactic landscape. Then, species that had been skeptical of humanity's claims now had undeniable proof that the Council had ordered assassinations against civilians and diplomatic officials, and the moral authority that the Council had claimed for 10,000 years evaporated in the face of their own operatives. Recorded confessions, protests erupted across Centauri worlds as their population demanded accountability from their government. And when it was revealed that Centauri intelligence had been involved in the assassination attempts, 3 members of their ruling council resigned in disgrace. The Catherine Unity publicly released documents showing that the Council had been suppressing their technological development for 800 years through a combination of patent restrictions, research prohibitions, and targeted economic sanctions designed to prevent them from becoming competitive with elder species, independent species that had been considering Council membership now withdrew their applications and applied to the Independent Coalition instead. And even some current Council members began internal debates about whether continued membership served their interests. The galactic media, which had traditionally been carefully managed by Council information ministries, found itself unable to control the narrative, because human communication networks operated independently and couldn't be censored. Public opinion swung dramatically against the Council as beings across the galaxy watched the evidence and drew their own conclusions about an organization that would murder people for choosing independence. But the Council's hardliners, particularly within the Crix hegemony and Ashen Collective, refused to back down. The invasion fleet continued to assemble at designated rally points, and its size had grown to 10,000 warships plus support vessels, logistics craft, and mobile repair facilities that together represented the largest concentration of military force in galactic history. Commander Thresh addressed his assembled fleet commanders with the fervor of someone who believed violence could restore a crumbling order. Humanity has poisoned the galaxy with their propaganda and lies, and they have turned loyal species against the Council through manipulation and bribery. And we will restore order through strength. His officers believed him because the alternative was confronting the possibility that their entire civilization had been built on suppressing others. And that was too painful for warrior minds to accept. The council itself was deadlocked in endless debates that grew more heated with each passing day. Half the members, led by the Zentari moderates, pushed desperately for negotiation and argued that the invasion would destroy any remaining moral authority the council possessed. And they pointed to the evidence of assassination programs as proof that the council had already crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. The other half, dominated by the Ashen Collective and Crick's hegemony, insisted that the invasion was necessary to prevent total collapse of the galactic order. And they argued that humanity's technological releases and political organizing represented an existential threat that justified extreme measures. The Ashen spokesperson made the economic argument explicit. If the independent coalition continues to grow, our entire economic model collapses within 10 years. And species that have depended on council markets for millennia will face catastrophic disruption. What the Ashen didn't say, but everyone understood, was that their civilization's wealth and power depended on maintaining their position at the top of the hierarchy, and genuine equality would destroy everything they had built. The 30-day deadline crept closer while the galaxy held its breath. Humanity remained oddly calm throughout this period, and their military forces maintained defensive positions but made no aggressive moves. And their diplomatic communications simply repeated the same message: dissolve the invasion fleet and agree to peace talks. But no one knew what the Prometheus Protocol meant, and the uncertainty was driving Council intelligence to increasingly reckless attempts to discover humanity's secret. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source when a low-level council scientist involved in information security became so terrified of what an invasion might trigger that he leaked classified internal memos to independent media. The revelation spread across the galaxy within hours. The Prometheus Protocol wasn't a weapon in any conventional sense. It was information, according to the leaked documents. Human intelligence had spent the past 18 months compiling a complete archive of Council secrets spanning 3,000 years. Every suppressed technology, every species that had been uplifted and then deliberately kept subordinate, every secret deal and backroom arrangement, every instance of technological theft from extinct civilizations, and every crime the Council had committed in the name of maintaining order. Archive included verifiable evidence of genocides covered up, rebellions crushed through overwhelming force, and entire civilizations sterilized because they had developed technology the Council considered threatening. But the truly devastating element of the Prometheus Protocol wasn't just historical crimes. Humanity had also developed and was prepared to release the complete schematics for FTL communication, systems that didn't require Council-controlled relay stations. And this technology would break the information monopoly that gave the Council power to control what species knew and who they could talk to if released. The Prometheus Protocol would expose 10,000 years of systematic exploitation and provide the technological means for every species to communicate freely without Council oversight. The galaxy reacted to this revelation with a mixture of horror and fascination. The 30-day deadline expired at 000 Galactic Standard Time, and the invasion fleet held position at the borders of human space while the Council leadership debated their final decision in emergency session. The Crick's hegemony had argued for sending a single dreadnought across the border as a test of humanity's resolve, and their logic was coldly calculating. If humans released the Prometheus Protocol in response to one ship, it would prove they were willing to destroy galactic stability over minor provocations. And if humans didn't release it, the threat was empty and the full invasion could proceed. Commander Thresh personally volunteered his flagship for this honor, and at 0300 Galactic Standard Time, his dreadnought crossed into human space with weapons powered but not armed. Technically a violation of territory, but not an overt act of war. Humanity's response came exactly 17 seconds later. The Prometheus Protocol flooded every information network in the galaxy simultaneously, and the sheer volume of data was staggering. 3,000 years of meticulously documented council crimes, complete with primary sources, verified records, and cross-referenced evidence that no reasonable being could dispute. The archive included footage of council forces sterilizing a species called the Valorians, because their mathematical innovations had threatened to revolutionize FTL technology beyond council control. And the recordings showed Valorian cities burning while council ships bombarded them from orbit. And the official council record had classified the Valorians as extinct due to stellar radiation event. It included financial records showing how the Ashen Collective had deliberately destabilized the economies of 17 developing species to acquire their resource-rich worlds at bankruptcy prices. And the contracts were signed by officials who were still serving in current government positions. It included communication intercepts, proving that the Council had known about the genocidal civil war on Tarkus Prime and had actively prevented intervention because both sides were weakening themselves enough to be easily controlled. Afterward, included technological patents stolen from extinct species and claimed as Council innovations, and evidence of research suppression that had delayed medical advances by centuries because allowing widespread health improvements might have shifted power dynamics. It included testimony from Council officials who had defected over the years, and their recorded statements detailed systematic programs of cultural suppression, technological gatekeeping, and economic manipulation designed to keep member species dependent and subordinate. The documentation was exhaustive, verified, and undeniable, and it painted a picture of the Galactic Council as an organization built on exploitation, disguised as order. But the archive didn't end with historical crimes. The Prometheus Protocol included complete schematics for FTL communication, systems that operated independently of Council relay stations. And the technology was elegant in its simplicity once someone explained it, and humanity had made it open source and freely available to anyone with the technical capability to build it. The implications were revolutionary because the Council's information monopoly had always depended on controlling who could talk to whom, and they had justified this control as necessary for communication standards and network security. But everyone now understood it was about power within. The first hour of the Prometheus Protocol's release, independent species across the galaxy began downloading the communication schematics and the historical archives. And by the sixth hour, the first non-Council FTL communication networks were coming online. The galaxy-ignited riots erupted on Ashen Collective worlds as their population learned that their government had built its wealth on economic warfare against helpless species, and protesters demanded immediate resignation of officials implicated in the archives. The Centauri Communion faced internal revolution when their citizens discovered that their supposedly enlightened government had participated in multiple instances of cultural genocide, and 3 of their colony worlds formally declared independence within the first day. The Catharan Unity released its own archive of documents showing how the Council had sabotaged their development for 800 years. And their revelations corroborated the human data and added even more crimes to the historical record. The Krik's hegemonies. Warrior culture went into crisis as evidence emerged that their greatest military victories had been achieved through Council-supplied intelligence that came from monitoring and betraying other species. And the honor-based society struggled to reconcile their self-image with documented proof of systematic deception. Minor species across the galaxy realized they had been deliberately kept primitive through technological suppression masked as developmental protocols, and 17 species filed formal charges in whatever international courts still had credibility. The Council's emergency session descended into chaos as delegates screamed accusations at each other, and governments that had cooperated for millennia turned on one another as they tried to deflect blame and distance themselves from the worst. Revelations, the invasion fleet, began to disintegrate as ships received orders from home governments that were suddenly fighting for their own political survival. And fleet commanders discovered that their crews were questioning orders as they learned about their government's crimes. Commander Thresh's flagship sat in human space, alone and ignored, as the great military force that was supposed humanity evaporated around him. And he finally ordered a retreat because there was nothing left to invade for. But humanity wasn't finished. Elena Vasquez appeared in a live broadcast that reached every corner of the galaxy, and her image was transmitted through both Council networks and the new independent communication systems that were spreading rapidly. The Prometheus Protocol was never meant to be a weapon, she said, and her voice was calm and steady despite the chaos erupting across the galaxy. It was meant to be the truth that the galaxy deserved to know. She stood in a simple office with Earth visible through the window behind her. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council has maintained order through information control and systematic suppression. And they convinced species that hierarchy was natural and that some beings were meant to rule while others were meant to serve. Our expression showed sadness rather than triumph. Humanity doesn't claim to be perfect, and our own history is filled with similar mistakes. And we know what it's like to believe that some groups are superior to others. And we know the pain of learning that the systems we trusted were built on exploitation. She pulled up a holographic display showing a new document. Today, we proposed a Galactic Concordat, and this is a framework for a new democratic organization where every species gets one vote, regardless of their military power or economic size. The proposal was revolutionary in its simplicity. No permanent security council, no elder species with veto power, no developmental protocols that were really just control mechanisms. And every species from the most advanced to the most recently uplifted would have equal voice in governance. We're not asking anyone to join, Elena continued. And we're not claiming authority to replace the council. And we're simply offering an alternative for species that want genuine partnership rather than hierarchy. She looked directly into the camera. Humanity will not lead this Concordat because we didn't do this to become the new council. And we did this so that everyone could stand as equals. The response was immediate and overwhelming within the first week. 50 species signed the Concordat's founding charter. And within the first month, that number grew to 200. And the signatories included both minor species who had never been allowed council membership and former council members who chose to abandon the old system. The original Galactic Council held one final session 6 months after the Prometheus Protocol's release, and only 7 of the original 12 founding species attended because the others had either collapsed into internal conflict or formally dissolved their membership. The Xanthari speaker, his crest now permanently gray with shame, made the final announcement. The Galactic Council, as constituted for 10,000 years, is hereby dissolved, and member species are released from all obligations and treaties. He paused and looked at the nearly empty chamber. Those of us who wish to continue cooperation are invited to apply for membership in the Galactic Concordat, under the same terms as any other species. The Krix hegemony fragmented into 7 smaller nations as their warrior. Culture split over questions of honor and historical crimes. And some factions insisted on maintaining the old ways, while others demanded fundamental reforms. Ashen Collective faced ongoing tribunals as their population demanded accountability for economic warfare and exploitation. And 3 of their council members were convicted of crimes against civilization and sentenced to public service, helping rebuild the species they had destroyed. Centauri Communion led the way in internal reforms, and they became humanity's strongest allies as they worked to make amends for their participation in council crimes. And their technological expertise, combined with human innovation, produced advances that benefited species across the galaxy.